In the beginning of October, I attended a film festival and got the vid and watched 11 movies in 6 days while I was recovering. Let's talk about it. Whenever I'm sick, I'm never in the mood to start a new TV show or read a book, so instead I decided to go into my Letterboxd watch list and pick out a couple of movies that I have not seen before, and finally just sit down and watch a ton of movies because what else was I going to do with my time? So I have my Letterboxd diary open and I'm going to go in chronological order of every single movie that I saw in 6 days and tell you my thoughts about them and which ones are worth your time and which ones I ended up not liking at all. So let's start with the first movie that I saw while I had the vid, and it is called Villains. It came out in 2019. It stars Bill Skarsgård and Micah Monroe, and I decided to watch this because I really like Bill Skarsgård. Any movie that he's in, I will watch besides it, which really freaks me out. But I just really enjoy him as an actor. He's my favorite Skarsgård, and I constantly am forcing myself to watch movies that he's in, even though I don't tend to like any of the movies that he's in. I just really like watching him, you know? It's just like one of those actors where it's like he's not in a lot of good movies, but like he's really fun to just watch for 2 hours, and that's what it felt like when I was watching Villains. In case you don't know what Villains is about, it follows a couple who are constantly stealing from delis and gas stations, and they end up breaking down after leaving a robbery that they just committed, and they find a house on the side of the road that they decide to break into to try and find a phone or gas to try and fix their car to leave the scene of the crime. And they end up finding this really dark secret in this house from the owners, who end up coming back home while they're breaking into the house, and that starts a series of events that unravels into absolute chaos. Villains is a really cool premise, but overall the movie was just not impressive at all. I really did enjoy the fact that Bill Skarsgård played kind of like a goofy boyfriend role, because he usually plays a lot of serious characters, and I liked the vibe switch from him, and I think that he should do more comedy because his timing and his delivery is really funny, and that's my favorite aspect of the movie. But overall the plot was just so outlandish, and I do understand this is a type of movie that doesn't take itself too seriously, but I just was not compelled by it. I wasn't compelled by the story. I wasn't compelled by the twist that it took, and it was just a movie that I saw that I wouldn't necessarily recommend unless you're like a die-hard Bill Skarsgård fan like me. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a die-hard Bill Skarsgård fan. If you're someone who likes watching him on the screen for like 2 hours, you would enjoy this movie, I guess. But this movie's not even 2 hours, it's like 90 minutes. And you know what? I love a 90-minute film. I love a film that knows when to stop and doesn't waste my time. Even though this one did waste my time because the story was like bad, but anyway, let's move on to the next movie. The next movie that I saw, I also gave 2.5 stars to, which I gave to Villains, and it is The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent is a movie that I think everyone else enjoys except for me, because I really don't like meta films. This is a movie starring Nick Cage, who is playing Nick Cage, and Nick Cage is recruited by the CIA to spy on a character who's played by Pedro Pascal, who is supposedly the head of a crime syndicate, and Nick Cage has to try and figure out a way to expose that evidence to the CIA so they can arrest him. This is another movie that I saw because I really like watching Pedro Pascal. I can watch him in anything. And again, I don't think that a lot of his movies are great, but I love watching him act because I just really like him. And this is another movie where I was like, I just put this on to watch Pedro Pascal, and the story was horrible. I was not endeared by it. I was not amused by it. It's just, I'm a very specific type of person when it comes to comedy. There's certain comedies that really hit for me, like Clue and Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. And then there's comedies that don't hit for me, like The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. I understood that going in, that it wasn't really going to be for me. I mostly was just watching it for Pedro Pascal, but yeah, I don't know. I just didn't have a lot of fun with this one. I'm glad I saw it because a lot of people always recommend it and a lot of people always talk about it, but it just wasn't for me. So those are the first two movies that I saw. We were starting out really rough, and then we hit gold with Speak No Evil. Speak No Evil 2022 version, the original version, rocked my world and I cannot stop talking about it. I've mentioned it at multiple parties. I'm like, you have to watch Speak No Evil. This movie will completely unnerve you and really impact you if you are a people pleaser. But in case you do not know, Speak No Evil follows a Danish family who visits a Dutch family that they met on holiday. The Dutch family decides to invite them over, and the Danish family's a little bit iffy about it because they all met while they were on vacation, and they didn't particularly form a great connection with one another. And they're like, I don't know if we should go to this Dutch family's house. We don't know them too well, but let's just take the shot, go on vacation, stay at their house. What's the worst that can happen? What was supposed to be an idyllic weekend slowly starts unraveling as the Danes try to stay polite in the face of unpleasantness. So Speak No Evil's entire premise is, what if you were stuck with rude people, but the rudeness and the disregard for your respect and autonomy was completely heightened to a level that is worthy of a horror movie. So Speak No Evil is a movie that starts out with subtle hints of disrespect from the Dutch family to the Danish family, and you're like, this is really uncomfortable. I'm getting secondhand embarrassment. This is like too much to watch. And then it increases and increases and increases to a level that wouldn't necessarily happen in real life, but it's taking the concept of what would you do in the face of absolute disrespect? Are you going to stand up for yourself, your wife, and your child, or are you going to sit there and take it? Speak No Evil really impacted me because I'm a people pleaser. I'm always trying to be the most polite person in the room. I'm always trying to please others, and I sometimes forsake myself while doing that. And this entire movie kind of takes that premise and shows you the worst possible scenario that can happen in a situation like that. While a lot of people on Letterboxd are very angry at the Danish family for just sitting there and taking it and not really standing up for themselves, I feel like it's a very realistic portrayal of a very passive family. There are a lot of passive people who don't stand up for others, who don't stand up for themselves, and that is what's explored in this movie. I think what I love the most about Speak No Evil is that there's no paranormal elements, there's no outlandish outlier that's affecting the story. It's a very realistic type of story, just kind of amped up to the fullest potential. And that's what I love the most about it, because it feels very plausible. It feels very realistic, and it makes you wonder, how would you act in that scenario? This is just a movie that you have to go in not knowing too much. I would not watch the trailer. I didn't see it beforehand. I just kind of went into it without knowing much about the plot, and I was thoroughly surprised. It's probably one of my new favorite horror movies of all time. It really affected me, and I cannot stop talking about it. Cannot recommend it enough. That's one of my favorite movies that I saw in the entirety of these 6 days. The next movie that I finally saw for the first time was The Dead Poets Society. I've always seen gifs of it and photos of it on Tumblr because it's such a classic dark academia film that so many people love and recommend. And I decided to put it on because it's autumn time. It feels like a very autumnal film, and it is. It has such beautiful vibes and such a beautiful atmosphere and made me miss school for like 0.1 second. And this is one of the most divisive ratings that I've given to all of the movies on this list, because I gave this 3.5 stars, and you have to hear me out because a lot of people were really upset when I posted my rating on my Instagram stories. And the reason why I gave The Dead Poets Society 3.5 stars is because I liked it, but I wasn't completely moved by this story for like 2 reasons. One, I wish there was a lot more Robin Williams in this movie. It kind of reminds me of The Holdovers, and I wish it had the same type of structure as The Holdovers, where the teacher is a very large presence in this film, and he is practically the main character of the film. And I wish that Robin Williams was the main character of this film. I wish he had more shining moments besides the moments where he's teaching the children. And I wish that we kind of knew more of his backstory. I know we understand that he was part of the Dead Poets Society, but I just wish we knew more about his character. He felt very flat for me. And the second reason why I gave this 3.5 stars and not like 4 or 5 is because I really do think I would have liked this a lot more as a teenager. I think this would have been such a profound movie if I saw it as a teenager. But Robin Williams telling me to seize the day and to appreciate art and poetry is a lesson that I learned when I was like 15. So watching this at 27 didn't impact me because all these life lessons that feel so profound, that feel so moving, were lessons that I already learned. So I was like, okay, like carpe diem, seize the day. I've heard that like my whole entire life. I think if I had watched this in middle school or early high school, I would have been so moved by the messages that were being shared, but they felt so stale for me. And that's totally fine if you love The Dead Poet Society and it's one of your favorite movies. I can totally understand why that is. I think I truly just watched it at the wrong time because this movie had the potential to like change my world, and I think it is a movie that I would put on during autumn time in the future and rewatch because I really did love the vibe and the setting and the characters. But overall I felt like I was distanced from Robin Williams' character, who could have been such a grand exploration of a man who loves the arts, who is really passionate about his students, but instead he just felt like a placement holder to tell these boys these life lessons that they needed to learn. So it's like, I understand the power of this movie and I understand why people love it so much, but personally it just didn't really affect me the way that I wish it did. But I can appreciate it, you know? It's like multiple feelings at once. I can appreciate the film, but I wasn't completely moved by it. Then I watched a movie that is one of my favorites of this list, and it is Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. This is an A24 movie about a little shell who lives in an Airbnb, and he is being interviewed by a documentary filmmaker, and he's literally just going through his daily life as he lives with his grandma, who's also a shell. This is such a heartfelt movie that just warmed my heart and almost made me cry because it is so sweet, and it's just a metaphor for the beauty of life and the beauty of community and family told through this little shell who's like this big, as he is living in this really big house in like California, and how he has a claim to fame because everyone starts loving Marcel the Shell. And one of my favorite aspects of this movie is the fact that nobody questions why Marcel the Shell is a talking entity. I love movies like that, like Paddington and We Bare Bears and Marcel the Shell. Like, they all have these creatures that are able to talk that aren't human, and nobody questions why that is. They're just like, oh yeah, like that's a shell that talks. And I love that aspect of a film because it just makes it feel so much cuter. It feels like a different world that you wish you could live in, where Marcel the Shell exists and he talks to you and can give you wisdom. Definitely give it a try if you think it's a little bit silly, if you think the premise isn't that great. That's what I thought when I initially saw the trailer. It just seemed like it wasn't going to be something that I would like, but it is so much more than that. And I feel like every A24 movie, if I'm not vibing with it in the trailer, it always ends up surprising me. And I've never truly hated an A24 film because they all have these profound lessons woven into the narrative that really take you by surprise, or they're also like a really weird movie. It's one or the other. An A24 movie can change your life for the better or also like traumatize you. It's really just your pick. After seeing Marcel the Shell and giving it 4.5 stars, like truly a fantastic film, I watched Every Brilliant Thing. So I love this live recording of a performance called In and of Itself. It's on Hulu, and it's one of my favorite documentaries that I've ever seen. It truly has changed my life and like altered my brain chemistry, and I wanted to find another live performance that gives me the same energy as In and of Itself. So I went to Reddit and someone recommended Every Brilliant Thing. This is a filmed version of Johnny Donahue's acclaimed one-man show about depression and the lens to which people go for those they love. So we follow Johnny as he is going through his experience learning that his mother has depression, and the list of things that he wrote down to help her kind of break out of her depression as a child. Because as a child, when he learned that his mother is depressed, he thought, if I give her a list of everything good in the world, she won't be depressed anymore. So he's kind of going through that entire list throughout this live performance. And it's a very heartfelt performance that I think can move people. But for me, it just didn't feel as impactful as In and of Itself, which also speaks about very heavy themes and a relationship with a mother. I think In and of Itself has so much more to gain and so much more to come back with when you leave that performance than Every Brilliant Thing. The next movie that I finally saw for the first time is Paddington 2. I loved Paddington 1 and Paddington 2 was just as cute as the first one. I really liked the hijinks that they got into in this film and it felt so Wes Anderson, and I really think they were inspired by the way that he directs films and the quirkiness that he puts into every one of his stories. And Paddington 2 was also just so heartfelt and, like Marcel the Shell, almost made me cry because it was so sweet and it was so heartwarming, and it's like the perfect cozy movie to put on to feel good and feel those warm fuzzy feelings that you get whenever you watch a Paddington film. My only critique of this film, which is why I didn't give it 5 stars, is the fact that I wish we had more elements of the family with Paddington. I felt like he was really on his own in the journey and they eventually join the hijinks, but I just wish we had more moments with the family because they were such a large aspect of the first film that I wish there was more of a relationship between Paddington and the family. And we do get it in the beginning, but like towards the middle we don't really see them and they don't really play a large role, and I felt like they were put in the back burner. But I don't know, Paddington gets into a lot of hijinks in this movie and he's like really busy, like he has a job now. So I guess he doesn't see his family as much, but it was such a cute movie and I'm really happy I saw it. It was like the perfect movie to stay in bed and watch, and it really warmed my heart, and I love Paddington and I cannot wait for the third movie. I think it's going to be really fun. Every single film gets better and better with its storyline and the villains that they introduce, and it's a movie that's truly for everyone. I think that anyone of any age can really enjoy Paddington. It's just really cute and soft and wonderful. Then I watched a movie where my rating was very divisive on Instagram again, and it is Coraline. And I gave Coraline 2.5 stars, and it is not what I expected it to be at all. I don't know what I thought the plot was going to be about, but the way that the movie unfolded was just like not my cup of tea, and people kept trying to like investigate why I didn't like Coraline. And I think that's a larger discussion of how we rate and how we discuss films. I think whenever someone says I didn't like a film, people assume that I found something problematic with it, or I have like an entire list of reasons as to why this film is not good. I never said that. I just said I didn't like Coraline. And I think those are two distinctions that you need to have when you see people's reviews. There's a difference between someone not liking a film and someone saying a film is bad. And I never said Coraline was bad. I just didn't like it. It's like the same reason why you wouldn't like a food. You can't really give a lot of reasons as to why you don't like a specific vegetable. You just know you don't like it. And that's what I felt when I saw Coraline. I liked the first like 10 minutes and then it lost me, and I really didn't like most of the story, and that's completely fine. You don't have to like everything that everyone else likes, and just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's bad. So I think that's important to keep in mind when someone says, I didn't like this book, I didn't like this movie. They're not saying it's bad, and maybe they are. And if they think something is bad, that does not affect your enjoyment of the thing that you love. People are allowed to have differing opinions, and people also don't need to provide you with a full-fledged essay as to why they didn't like the thing. Sometimes people don't like books, sometimes people don't like movies, and sometimes people don't like shows, and they don't really need to give you a reason why. They can just be like, it wasn't my thing. And that's how I felt when I watched Coraline. Again, I'm not giving a reason. I just didn't like it. It's fine. Especially to the man who wrote it. Me not liking his story, that's fine. Oh my god, I forgot. After I saw Coraline, I saw that new Netflix movie called It's What's Inside that people are comparing to Bodies, 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 and I have such a gripe against that because I do not think it's even at the same level as Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. And Bodies, Bodies, Bodies is a distinctly Gen Z horror movie, and this movie felt like a movie written by a millennial who's pretending that their characters are Gen Z, and every single joke and every single reference and every single character felt like a caricature of what people assume Gen Z is. And It's What's Inside also doesn't have a premise that makes a lot of sense, so let me read you the synopsis. A pre-wedding party descends into an existential nightmare when an estranged friend shows up with a mysterious suitcase. That's all I'm going to give you in terms of the premise, because I can get a little bit deeper, but I think the twist is a little bit fun to play with when you watch it without knowing much about the plot. But it's what's inside, like, insults me when people say it's like just as good as Bodies. I really think it isn't. It felt so muddled in its premise, and each of the characters didn't really have like a distinct energy that I could latch onto. And that's why I gave a 1 star, because it truly felt like a waste of my time. Like, I could have just rewatched Bodies and had a better time instead. Next is one of my favorite movies that I've seen of this entire list that completely horrified me, and it is The Vanishing. The Vanishing follows a French couple on a road trip when they decide to take a break at a rest stop and the wife disappears. 3 years later, the husband is still on the hunt for the wife, Saskia, when he starts receiving letters from the man who took Saskia, which spurs him to want to search for her even more to find out what happened to her. And The Vanishing is considered a psychological thriller, but I really consider it to be a horror movie because as a woman, it's one of my biggest fears to be taken on a road trip or while I'm on vacation where I'm not familiar with my surroundings. And it takes the premise of that and expands it into this film that is so unnerving and so full of tension. You can feel the foreshadowing looming over you. And The Vanishing is so horrifying because, again, like Speak No Evil, it feels very realistic. It feels like a very realistic scenario. And the way that the story unfolds is also really horrifying because you also find out who took Saskia and you get into his mind and you go through his daily life and you see how he acts, and being in his perspective is so skin crawling and so disgusting, and it fills you with anger. It filled me with a lot of anger to be in his perspective because I'm like, why would you do that? Why would you do that to Saskia? Why would you do that to her husband? Why would you do that to the women before Saskia? And you kind of feel like the husband in a way because you want to find out what happened to her, even though you know that finding out what happened to her is going to be the worst thing possible, because that's what they tell you at the beginning, that you shouldn't look into what happened. You should just move on. You should just put it at ease and put it to rest. But you as the viewer, you have this curiosity to find out what happened, and the film warns you, don't look too deep into it. And then you look too deep into it, and then you're left feeling completely gutted. The Vanishing feels like when your stomach bottoms out and you are filled with this dread, and that's what it feels like throughout the whole entire movie. I think the buildup of tension is flawless. This entire movie is such a fascinating look at a scenario that a lot of people think about, and just kind of playing it out from the perspective of the husband and also the person who committed the crime. And I think the juxtaposition of those two perspectives is completely horrifying, and it is a movie that I cannot recommend enough. It is a great psychological thriller. It's really horrific in a way that's not too loud and boisterous. It's a very quiet film, but the quietness is what's most horrifying. So cannot recommend that one enough. I gave it 4.5 stars. Every time I think about it, I feel like I should give it 5 stars, but I do think that some scenes are a little bit slow and I think it could have been edited down just a little bit. But overall, it's such a fantastic film that I want more people to see. And the last film that I saw while I was sick was Witness for the Prosecution. This came out in the 50s. It stars Marlene Dietrich, which is my first ever Marlene Dietrich film, and it is an adaptation of Agatha Christie's novel, and it follows a famous ailing barrister who agrees to defend Leonard Vole in a sensational murder trial, and his self-possessed wife's unconvincing testimony makes the case difficult. I was initially like, okay, like what's going to happen? What's the twist? Because with every Agatha Christie story, there is a great twist that really leaves you on the edge of your seat, and you're like, how did I not see that coming? And I went through most of the film feeling pretty neutral about it, and then we got to the testimony and we got to the trial overall. And the amount of plot twists that occurred within 10 minutes completely rocked my world, and I was like, 4 stars. Give this movie 4 stars because it had so many twists that I was never expecting, and it just kept going, like a twist would occur and then another one would occur and another one would occur, and so much information came out all in one go where I was like completely overwhelmed by the motivations of all these characters, and then I was completely impressed by the motivations of all these characters because I completely read them wrong throughout this entire film, and I didn't know where it was going and I didn't know how it was going to end, and it really just surprised me, and I was really impressed by Marlene Dietrich's performance. She has a really cool and collected aura about her where you can't really read her as a character and you don't know what she's planning behind the scenes, and I think that that is the perfect element for this film because you can never truly know what these characters are hiding, and when it's all revealed at the end, it is explosive and so much fun, and I think it's most definitely worth your time if you're a fan of courtroom dramas the way that I am. Do keep in mind that the first half of the movie is a little bit dry, but the latter half is so fun and explosive and you'll never see what's going to happen next, and that's my favorite aspect of it. So those are the 11 movies that I saw in 11 days, and I had some highs, I had some lows, I watched some amazing movies that I can't stop thinking about, and I watched some duds that I just wasn't really a fan of, but based on my favorites like the international films and Marcel the Shell and Witness for the Prosecution, recommend some movies that you think would be up my alley so I can add them to my watch list. If you want to follow me over on Letterboxd or Instagram or TikTok where I speak about movies over there, all my links are down below. If you've stayed this far in the video, leave a purple heart emoji so we can see who stays for the longest. If you do, I really do appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed me discussing more about these films because I did post a lot about them on my Instagram stories, but I wanted to go into depth about my thoughts about them, so I hope you enjoyed being able to hear more about that, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!